This message, entitled Diotrephes, was preached by Jean Severage of South City Church in Brighton, UK.
Input into the ministry to the known world at the time. We read about Paul's letter to the Romans, and he talked about all of these people that he knew and he knew about who'd done so much to impact his ministry and the ministry of others, and he mentioned them with fondness. Do you guys remember those wonderful words of encouragement? It's as if he would have written it was a normal letter. It was a letter of love and greeting, and it was almost like Paul was saying, hey, say hello to Joan and thank her for coming for tea yesterday. It was wonderful spending time with her. Oh, and Julie, thank Julie for bringing biscuits a couple of Wednesdays ago. And Colleen, oh, her generous heart. I tell you, I want to commend Colleen. That's what Paul would have done. He would not have had just a kind of a superficial, over your head kind of a greeting. And sometimes I think we think that it's all about, and I pray that you grow in all wisdom and spiritual understanding and all of that. Those things are wonderful and they're God's word, but Paul was very practical. He was very practical. He picked up on relationships and the keys of those relationships, and he commended people. He appreciated people because he knew they were the ones who added to his ministry, who've had a tremendous impact. Can we just go through some of the names that maybe jumped out at you that you've never heard before? Somehow you remember now from memory. Any names? Come on. Erastus being one of them, yes. Tychicus being another one. You want to practice that one, you can tell. Tryphena and Tryphosa. Julie likes it because they sound like twins, you know. And what about some other names? And there was stacks, so you got no excuse. Philemon, Priscilla and Aquila, yes. What about our Epaphroditus? Hey, all of these guys added to Paul's ministry. They were wonderful. And I think sometimes when we read the New Testament, all we think about is Paul, Peter, John, Mark, Luke, and all of these guys, and Timothy. But there were guys, other than Timothy and Titus and all of those guys, and Barnabas, man, guys who Paul commended hugely. I mean, you heard some of those greetings and some of those comments he made about folk. They were huge. They were big. He commended them. He said they added so much. And in some cases, they impacted the whole city. They impacted the whole of Asia, he talks about. But today I picked a guy that most of us would have never heard of. And in fact, there's some things spoken about this guy. There are 2 verses that are dedicated to this guy that aren't so positive. They're a bit of a rebuke. In fact, they're not a bit of, they're quite a rebuke to this guy. Anybody have an idea of who I'm talking about? Demas. Not Demas. Yes, similar to Demas, because Demas, remember Paul says, Demas forsook me. He has forsaken me. He just left because he was worried about his own self. He was worried about the affairs of the world. He got carried away. Yes, Demas is one of them. And this guy is similar to Demas because he has the same letter. His name begins with a D as well. Let's see if you know. Diotrephes, I call him. There you go. Julie knows her Bible. Diotrephes. I want to talk about this guy called Diotrephes this morning. He's in the Bible. We're going to read it now. You know, years ago, 7-Up. Remember, do you know 7-Up? The cola or the drink. It's not a cola, it's the drink. 7-Up came up, they launched a new ad campaign, right? They launched a new ad campaign, and they proudly call themselves the Uncola. See, Alex now, he works for Coca-Cola, and so he's marketing Coke Zero, Coca-Cola Zero, zero sugar. Now, just like Coke is launching this new product, you know, I've seen it, you know, for folk between the ages of 30 and 18 to 35. So, and for men, this particular Coke Zero. But 7-Up introduced this new campaign, and they call themselves the Uncola. And you know what? That launched them. It actually caused them to soar in terms of the market, because now they'd gone to a new part of the market. They gained a strong footing in terms of that market, and they had increased revenues. They gained millions as a result of branding themselves as the Uncola. They didn't say 7-Up is the lemon drink or whatever. They branded themselves as the Uncola. Imagine doing that. Branding yourself as an uncola. And so that's what 7-Up did. And the ads didn't describe so much the company's product. Instead, they made it clear what their soda was not. Imagine doing that. Imagine your life statement, I am not such and such, and I'm not such and such. And these are not my values. Imagine having a mission statement, and this is not my value. And hey, it's kind of odd. It should be the other way maybe. You know, I am a man of character, and I stand for this. But instead, they almost, I don't stand for this, and I don't stand for that. So we are uncola. The critical word, though, that I'm trying to get at is the word un. Now, what does the word un mean in the Greek? I have no idea. But the prefix seems to suggest two things. The first thing that I think the word un seems to suggest is different. The second thing that it suggests is opposite. So uncola is different to cola, and it's opposite to cola. That's what they were trying to communicate. So go with me to 3 John. John 3, or 3 John, not John 3, but 3 John, epistles, 3 books that the apostle, or John the apostle wrote. First he wrote the Gospel of John, but he also wrote John 1, 2, and 3, which are near Revelation. Okay, 3 John. Now this was a letter from John the apostle to this group of folk. He was known as the beloved. He was known as the friend of Jesus. He had a very close relationship with Jesus. He was known for his message of love, because he loved Jesus, and everything was marked by love. And he talked about agape love. You read 1 John and 2 John and 3, and you can just see this thing of love coming out there, isn't it? Have you read those books? Hopefully you have. But when a letter like this arrived to any church, whether Paul wrote it, or Peter wrote a letter, or whomever, when a letter was sent to a church from an apostolic man, it was read by one of the elders, but it was read publicly to the church. So that's what the Bible is. Can I borrow your Bible? These are letters, especially the New Testament. The epistles are not the wives of the apostles. The epistles are letters written to churches to encourage them, to teach them. And so that 3 John would have been a letter, a very small letter, almost like a postcard, it seems. Right? A letter. And he says, from the elder to my friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth, my dear friend. And he says, I pray that you're doing well in every way and that your health is good. It's good to encourage each other and wish each other well, or pray that we're well in body and in spirit and in mind. And this is how he starts his letter. We start our letters today saying, dear so-and-so, I hope you're well. It's been a while since I've chatted to you, but I hope you and your family are well. Oftentimes we start, and that's the flavor of this letter. It starts off in that way here. And so when the letter arrived, the church would gather together and one of the elders would read it aloud. And there's some words, though, that must have had folks nudging each other and exchanging sort of meaningful glances with each other because certain names were mentioned. It's almost as if a letter came here and, what's his name? Gert Dolk from Holland, who made reference to James at one of the leadership training times. And maybe Gert sends this letter to this church and he says, hey, I remind James about his wonderful smile. Some of you were there, you remember he alluded to that, he mentioned that. Hey, can you imagine Alex now sitting there nudging James saying, hey, that's about you, bud. See, that's the kind of flavor that this letter would have had. Gratitude and this being feeling special, if you would, feeling affirmed. But I have an idea that John's epistle, this particular epistle, went off like an AK-47 machine gun. And when the smoke had cleared, everybody realized that the apostle had no intention of tiptoeing around what must have been a highly sensitive issue in that particular congregation. He had some very strong words to say about this man, Diotrephes. Diotrephes, as Julie says. In their midst, who wanted very badly to be a leader, but was in fact, I want to use that word, an unleader. It's not proper English, I know, but I'm using it for a reason. Because remember the word un, I said, suggests two things, different and opposite. This guy was an unleader, but he wanted very much to be a leader. And just like 7-Up is the uncola, Diotrephes was the unleader. To put it in plain English, this guy, he was a nana. Honestly, he was, in modern day English, he was a jerk. Go to John 3, or 3 John verse 9. Let's read 2 verses there. 2 verses. You might be tired after reading these 2 verses, but bear with me, because it's so lengthy. And he says, I wrote to the church. So stop right there. John is saying, I've written to the church, I wrote to the church. And he goes on to say, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with us. So if I come, I will call attention to what he's doing, gossiping maliciously about us. He's gossiping about the apostles. Not satisfied with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. My goodness, this guy had a lot of arrogance. We started leaders training last week, and one of the best definitions I've ever heard of what a leader is also one of the shortest, and it's by Dr. Howard Hendrick. Some of you may have heard of him. He was the sort of the mentor of Bruce Wilkinson, who from Walk Through the Bible Ministries. But Dr. Howard Hendrick says a leader is someone who leads. That's it. That's all of it. A leader is someone who leads. We might have the title lead, team captain, CEO, CFO, chairman of the board, platoon leader, principal, sir, pastor, elder, husband, mom, and that's great. But you're only a leader if you lead. No matter what your title is, you're only a leader if you lead. And Diotrephes wanted so badly to be a leader. And obviously he had some clout in that church. Obviously he had some clout. He had some influence in that church. But a leader, a Christian leader, I don't think so. A leader according to the heart of God, I don't think so. Diotrephes was an unleader. And let me tell you why he was an unleader. I'm going to give you 5 marks of an unleader. I've read many books about the marks of a leader, and Dudley Daniel, who used to lead the New Covenant team, has put some wonderful, very practical books on what a leader is and the character of a leader. And so often we focus on the outward appearance of a leader, how tall he is, how good looking he is, how well he talks, and how well he's gifted. And yet God looks at the heart. Verse 9 says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first. My first mark of an unleader is an unservant. Please don't go and report me to the English Council saying he's abusing the English language. I'm just taking license here. An unleader is an unservant. Diotrephes loved to be first. Mark chapter 9, verse 35 says, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. That's not what the world teaches. But Jesus says, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. The world says, push yourself up and trample everybody down so that you can get higher. Jesus says, no, you serve everyone. Matthew chapter 18 verse 4 says, therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest thing in the kingdom of heaven. Matthew chapter 20 and 26 to 28 says, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And Diotrephes loved to be first. Diotrephes loved being served. Diotrephes enjoyed being a big shot. Diotrephes got a kick out of special privileges. Diotrephes liked to impress people. The fact is, we all lead in some way. If you're a parent, you're leading. If you're in a workplace, you're leading. But there's an important question that we need to ask ourselves is, do we want to lead like Jesus, or do we want to lead like Diotrephes? Do we want to lead by the example that Jesus set, which is to be a servant, or do we want to lead like the example that Diotrephes set, which was to be served, to demand, to want to be first? I wonder if you'd go with me to John chapter 13. And it says in verse 1 of chapter 13 of John, it says, "It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love." The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his feet, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize that now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." And then Lord, Simon Peter replied, "Not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. And when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I've done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth. No servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Jesus was saying, actually, the point isn't that you just wash your feet, the feet of somebody else. That's not the point. The point is that you are serving. Jesus, the Son of God, sitting with his disciples, didn't say to them that the greatest of you is the one who preaches. The greatest of you is the one who speaks with such great eloquence. He said the greatest of you is this, and he gets down and he washes somebody's feet. James, I wonder if you could come here quickly. Who'd be willing for me to wash their feet? James, shall I wash your feet? You want to get your shoes off, bud? I want to show you something here, because there's a wonderful lesson in this. There's a real wonderful lesson. And it's and the reaction you might have right now is the reaction I'm sure the disciples had. How can Jesus do this? Maybe that's what they thought. How can Jesus wash my feet? That's what Peter said. He says, "Lord, no, you cannot wash my feet." He wasn't being obstinate. I think he was just, it's humbling for you to wash somebody's feet, but it's also humbling for somebody to wash your feet. I think it requires, and you know, the wonderful thing about washing somebody's feet isn't that you're just humbling yourself. It's actually saying relationship If I've got a problem with James, I'm telling you, I'm going to have a problem washing his feet. Do you think I'm going to wash his feet very freely? No. This kind of thing. Come here, James. You don't have to put it all the way in. Let's just put this up here. And this is what Jesus did. He put on an apron. See, this is what a servant does. In the old days, this is what a servant would do for the master. When the master came from work or came home that evening, the servant would have to come and wash the master's hands and feet, and the servant would then go bring supper. That's what a servant does. And Jesus is saying that this is what we're meant to do for each other. He's not saying that we need to get into a religious rut and have foot washing ceremonies. He's not talking about that. He's talking about the heart here. He's saying actually this is what we're meant to be doing in our actions and in our heart for one another. It's a humbling thing to wash the feet of somebody. I'm telling you. We'd gladly wash somebody's hands. We'd gladly wash somebody's arms. But if the feet don't conjure up pleasant thoughts. And yet Jesus is saying actually, like the servant would come home and wash the master's feet, that's the attitude we need to take. Philippians talks about the very attitude that Jesus had, taking on the very nature of a servant. He's saying that's the attitude we need to have. Come here, James. And that's what Jesus would have done. I can imagine the nudging going on with the disciples. They must have probably thought, oh, who's going to be next? You're going to be next. Oh, it's my turn next. My second mark of an unleader is an unleader is unteachable. What does it say there? I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with the apostles. Another translation says he does not accept what we say. He doesn't accept what the apostles are saying. What does your translation say, Yana? Just verse 9.
I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be their leader, will not listen to us.
He will not listen. He will not accept what they say. This guy was unteachable. I don't know if you said anything like this when you were a child, but I can vaguely remember me saying that I can't wait till I grow up. And then nobody will tell me what to do. You ever hear that being said? Oh, when I grow up, nobody's going to tell me what to do. I can't wait for that time. And guess what? I'm in my 30s now, and everybody's still telling me what to do. Hey, the Inland Revenue tells me what to do. The DVLA tells me what to do. The Brighton and Hove City Council tell me what to do. Hey? But that is the kind of way life works. What we're talking about here is a teachable spirit. Great leaders know how to submit to authority. A lot of people have leadership inclinations, but not everybody wants to submit. You know, they want to do it their way. Diotrephes didn't care a hoot for John. He didn't care a hoot for the elders of that church. He didn't care a hoot for the apostles, the apostolic authority that they had. No one was going to tell him anything. He just flat wouldn't hear it. He wasn't teachable. Truth is, as husbands, we've got to be teachable. As wives, we've got to be teachable. As children, we've got to be teachable. As elders, whether you're an elder in a church or you're elderly in age, we've got to be teachable. My third mark of an unleader is unhospitable. I'm using the word un here. I know it's inhospitable or whatever, but an unleader is unhospitable What does it say there? I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with us. So if I come, I will call to attention what he is doing, gossiping maliciously about us. Not satisfied with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers. And he stops those who wants to do so and puts them out of the church. Inhospitable. What does that have to do with anything? Hospitality goes hand in hand with servant-heartedness. Goes hand in hand with a servant spirit. Why? Because if you want to serve people, you want to bless them, you want to give, you want to minister to them. See, we're not talking about just washing feet now. We serve each other by being hospitable. We serve each other by just what we have, sharing what we have. The wonderful mark of the early church was that they shared everything. They had everything in common. If somebody had, they shared it. Generously, willingly. Hospitality is so important, guys. I tell you, if you've got a grudge against somebody, you're going to find it difficult to be hospitable to that person. That's why we constantly have this encouragement to deal with relationships. Because I tell you, these relationships directly influence our relationship with Jesus. Sometimes we think, I don't need you guys. I'm just going to be with God in my garden. I don't need the church. I don't need you guys. In fact, I'd be a wonderful Christian had it not been for you guys. Actually, you wouldn't. Your character wouldn't be shaped and formed. We need each other, guys. An unleader, my next point, it is number 4. An unleader has an unhappy family. Pity Mrs. Diotrephes. Pity little Diotrephes Jr. Pity the in-laws of Diotrephes. We don't know if he was married, but let's assume that he was. You can believe that someone with all of these wonderful characteristics will have a miserable family. Why? Because he's not going to serve his family. He's going to want to be served. He's going to tell his wife what to do. You've got to do this. You've got to cook me my food by this time. You've got to have my clothes ironed by this time. No, I'm going to watch TV. I'm coming from work. I worked hard all day. Leave me alone. Just bring me my cucumber sandwiches. Oh, you bring that here. Didn't I tell you to bring that here? That's what Diotrephes would have been like at home. He would have been somebody overbearing, demanding. And he would have had an unhappy family as a result. He wouldn't have served his wife. Wouldn't have served his children. We can serve our children without pandering to their every mischievous whim. We can still serve them, love them. Diotrephes would have demanded, I want my dinner by this time. You're going to have it, otherwise there's trouble. He would have had an unhappy family, guys. Do you think Diotrephes would have been absent at the public reading of Scripture when this letter came? I think he would have been there. I think he would have been there because he would have thought that John would have commended him. Oh, here's John, the loving apostle, whatever. I don't care about him, but anyway, I'm going to be there because... And he would have probably been at the front of the church, right up there, because he wants to be a leader. And I think it would have been a shock and surprise for old Diotrephes here when John started rebuking him in that letter. I think everybody would have stared straight at him. That's tough stuff, guys. It's tough stuff when you are sitting there thinking you're the hero and suddenly this letter comes saying, actually, you're not all that. You've got a problem. You've got a problem. You're arrogant. Imagine if that letter came. Imagine if Grant Crawford, somebody that we look up to in terms of an apostolic mandate, wrote a letter here and said, hey, Colleen, I want to bring you to account right now. Imagine if this letter, and John suddenly reading this letter, and I want to thank Bill for his help with the sound equipment and Yana for her wonderful chef ability and her hospitality. But you, Colleen, you got a problem. You're arrogant in the church. You're slapping people around as they're coming through the door. And you're hogging all the biscuits, Colleen. Hey, now, for those listening on the tape, this Colleen isn't like that, but I'm using an example here. Imagine Colleen's... she thinks she's all it now. She's, coming into the church and I'm the spiritual one, and I got my Bible. I'm the greeter. I'm the greeter at the door, And then she comes in there and suddenly she gets a whipping from John. And it's a rebuke, not a malicious rebuke, but one from the heart of God saying, that's not right, that's not the way to go. That's what John, that was the motive here. That was the motive. Gentle and gracious John had taken off the gloves, guys, and was sounding more like a son of thunder that he used to be called. The next mark, I think it's mark number 5. Mark of an unleader. An unleader is not a person of prayer. Do you know what Diotrephes means in the original language? Anybody have a clue? What do you think it means? Barnabas means son of encouragement. He was an encourager. Diotrephes means nourished by Jupiter. Jupiter was a false god. And we can have false gods in our lives as well. We can be nourished by false gods other than the true and living God. Could it be the God of power? Could it be the God of popularity and fame? Or is it the drive to be number one? Real men serve. Real women serve. I'm working on it. We have to work on it. We got to work on our love for each other and our service to one another, guys. I think sometimes we spend so much energy and time working on our preaching ability, working on our guitar skills, working on all of these other things which actually aren't as important as what's on the inside that comes out. We should be working on how well we excel in our service to each other. What did Paul say? Paul, yes, talked about the more excellent way. What was the more excellent way? Love. Expressed in servant-heartedness. Expressed in service. Are you a servant? Are you growing in your servant-heartedness? Or do you want to be served? At home, do you demand things? Do you push? If you're living with folk, if you're living in there's nobody living in a digs here. You live in a digs. Do you demand people to do things for you, to do your washing, leave dishes there, they must wash it? I think one of the things that brings strife in a home is when husbands just leave dishes. Somebody will do it. The wife will do it. Leave the socks lying all over the place. Smelly, and visitors come, and what is that? Oh, it's the socks. Because my wife will pick it up. Guys, we should be serving one another, loving each other, being teachable. I'll tell you, I've got to work on being teachable. My heart is to be, I don't sit there thinking, I've reached it, nobody can teach me. I'm telling you, my heart is to be molded. Why? Because one day I want to stand before God and He's saying, well done, my good and faithful servant. Because that's what counts. That's what God looks at. Hey? We've got to serve each other, guys, in practical ways. Sometimes I think service is just, we serve each other with our words. We've got to serve each other practically. That's what servant-heartedness is all about. It's expressed. You cannot keep servant-heartedness just in your heart. Just as you cannot keep love in your heart, it's got to be expressed. We've got to express our humility and our servant-heartedness by serving. Got to serve each other. Invite folk to your house. Treat them for a scone. We're meant to be Christians who have good deeds. It says, let your light shine before men that they may see your good deeds. There must be some good deeds there. What are those good deeds? I think they're service. Service not just to believers, but to unbelievers. That they may see your good deeds, and then what? Glorify your Father. I'll tell you, service that comes from the heart glorifies the Father. Glorifies the Father.